Gavin almost dropped his coffee mug when he heard Alara scream loudly. The early morning was quiet until that moment. He ran quickly to the hallway. He could hear her small feet stumbling and sliding. When he saw her, Alara was holding onto the wall with one hand, reaching out for him with the other. Her face was red and looked scared, and her mouth was open like she was trying to say something. "Daddy," she cried, but her words came out strange and hard to understand. Gavin's heart started pounding so fast it felt like drums in his ears. He reached her just as her legs gave out, and she fell into his arms. Her small body felt so light and weak, and she was breathing quickly, like she had just run a long race. Her eyes were wide, but didn't seem to focus on anything. Isabel came rushing from the kitchen, still holding a dish towel. When she saw what was happening, her face went pale. "What's going on?" she whispered, her voice shaky. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Gavin was holding their daughter tightly. Alara's tiny hands clung to his shirt, but her head hung to the side, too heavy for her to hold up. "Mommy, everything's spinning," Alara mumbled. Her words were slow and hard to hear. She looked at Isabel like she didn't know who she was. Isabel's heart broke into a million pieces. This wasn't her happy, bouncy little girl, the one who couldn't stop giggling and running around. This wasn't the child who danced around the house, pretending to be a fairy. Now, Alara was limp in Gavin's arms, like all her energy and light had been stolen. "We're going to the hospital." "Now," Gavin said, his voice shaky and full of fear. He held Alara close as Isabel grabbed the car keys. Her hands were trembling so much it took her 3 tries to unlock the car. The drive to the hospital felt like a blur. Alara was in her car seat, her little head leaning to one side. Her eyes kept fluttering open and closed, like she was in a bad dream. Isabel kept looking back at her, her heart beating so fast it felt like it might burst. She tried not to cry, but it was so hard. At the hospital, everything happened quickly. There were loud voices, doctors rushing around, and bright lights everywhere. Gavin held Alara tightly as nurses came to check her. They asked lots of questions, but Gavin couldn't answer. His voice seemed to disappear because he was so scared. Isabel did her best to explain everything, even though she was speaking so fast that her words tumbled out like a waterfall. Hours went by. Gavin paced outside the room where Alara lay on a big bed. He kept peeking inside every few seconds, watching as doctors worked around her. She had wires and machines attached to her, all making strange beeping noises. Finally, a doctor came out. Her face was serious and hard to read. Gavin grabbed Isabel's hand, holding it tightly as if that could make everything okay. "I'm afraid it's serious," the doctor said softly. She looked at them for a moment before continuing. "We found a tumor in Alara's brain. It's called DPG. I'm so sorry, but it's untreatable." Gavin felt like his whole world had stopped. He couldn't even understand the words. Next to him, Isabel's hand squeezed his so hard it hurt. "No," Isabel said, her voice cracking. "That can't be true. She's just 6 years old. She's strong. There has to be medicine or a surgery that can fix this." The doctor shook her head sadly. "DPG is very aggressive. It grows in a part of the brain that we can't operate on. I'm so sorry, but there's nothing we can do to stop it. She might have 5 months, maybe a little more." Isabel stepped back, holding her chest like she had been hit. Her breathing was fast and shaky. Gavin sat frozen, like he couldn't move. It felt like his heart had been crushed. "There's nothing we can do," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. The doctor's face was full of sadness. "We can't cure it, but we'll do everything we can to make her comfortable." "Comfortable?" Isabel repeated, her voice rising. "She's 6. I don't want her to be comfortable. I want her to be healthy. I want her to live." Gavin hugged Isabel tightly as she cried into his chest. Her small fist hit him weakly, but he didn't let go. "It's not fair," she sobbed. "She was supposed to grow up. She was supposed to have a life." Gavin held her even tighter, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know how they would get through this. Then, an awful thought crossed both their minds. Should they tell Alara? If they told her, she would lose her happiness. She would stop believing in magic and stop smiling. Gavin shook his head. "I can't tell her, Isabel," he whispered. "I can't take away her joy. She doesn't need to know. Not yet." Isabel wiped her tears and nodded. Maybe we can keep her happy. Let her enjoy what time she has left. They stayed in the hospital room, watching over their little girl. Alara was sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling. Gavin and Isabel held hands, silently promising to protect her happiness for as long as they could. In the days that followed, they tried to keep everything normal. Alara's room was filled with her favorite toys, crayons, and picture books. Isabel brought her special snacks, and Gavin read her stories every night. They filled her world with love and laughter, even though it made their hearts ache. But one night, Alara woke up and heard her parents talking just outside her door. She got out of bed quietly and walked closer to listen. "How are we supposed to do this?" Isabel said, her voice shaky, "Knowing we only have a few months left." Alara's little heart raced as she heard the words, "a few months." She didn't understand everything, but she knew something was wrong. She stepped back from the door, her mind full of questions. The next morning, Alara acted like everything was fine. She played with her dolls and tea set, smiling and laughing. Gavin and Isabel smiled back, thinking she was okay. But inside, Alara felt scared. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew something wasn't right. Still, she decided to be strong for her parents. If they didn't want her to know, maybe it was because they were trying to protect her. And so, she kept pretending everything was okay, even though her little heart was heavy with worry. Alara held a secret deep inside her heart. It wasn't a happy secret. It was a sad one that felt heavy, like carrying a big rock everywhere she went. She didn't know how to talk about it, especially with her parents, who always looked so tired and worried. She didn't want to make them sadder, so she kept quiet. Every day, she tried to smile and pretend everything was okay, even though her heart felt heavier and heavier. At just 6 years old, Alara understood more than she should. She knew her time might be short, though she didn't know exactly how much she had left. That's why she decided she wanted to do something special, something her family would always remember. She wanted them to have a happy memory, even when things got hard. One quiet night, when the hospital was dark and still, Alara made up her mind. She slipped out of her bed and put on her favorite slippers. She looked back at her parents, who were sleeping in chairs beside her bed. Their faces looked so tired, and her heart ached because she knew they were worried about her. She wiped away a small tear and promised herself she wouldn't wake them. She didn't want them to see her sadness. With careful steps, she walked out into the hospital hallway. It was so quiet that her tiny footsteps didn't make a sound. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed a moment to be alone. The air outside the hospital was cool and fresh, and for the first time in weeks, she felt free. The stars twinkled like tiny friends in the sky, making her feel less lonely. She took a deep breath and felt stronger, as if the night itself was giving her courage. As she wandered a little farther, she heard a strange sound from a dark alley. It was a small, scared yelp, like someone was crying for help. Alara's heart began to race as she followed the sound. In the alley, she saw a group of older kids surrounding a small dog. The poor dog was skinny and shaking, his big eyes filled with fear. The kids were laughing and being mean, poking him with a stick and calling him names. Alara felt something strong rise up inside her. She didn't know where her bravery came from, but she couldn't just stand there and do nothing. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice louder than she expected. The kids turned to look at her, surprised. "Who's this?" "A little hero," one of them sneered. "Leave him alone," Alara said firmly, even though her hands were shaking. "He didn't do anything to you." The kids laughed, one of them waving the stick toward her. "What are you going to do about it?" another said, stepping closer to her. Alara felt scared, but she couldn't leave the dog all alone. She took a deep breath, standing as tall as she could. "You're just cowards," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Only bullies hurt someone who can't fight back." For a moment, the kids looked unsure, but their leader shrugged and raised his hand as if to shoo her away. Just then, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the alley. The kids froze, then scattered as the sound of a police siren grew louder. As soon as they were gone, Alara ran to the dog. "It's okay now," she whispered, gently touching him. The dog looked up at her, his big, sad eyes softening as he realized he was safe. He slowly leaned into her touch, his small body trembling less. A police officer approached her, crouching down to her level. "Hey there, are you all right?" he asked kindly. Alara nodded, still petting the dog. "He was all alone," she said softly. "He needed someone." The officer smiled. "Well, it looks like he found the right person to help him." At the police station, Alara sat in a big, plastic chair, the dog huddled by her side. She kept stroking his scruffy fur, feeling like they had already become friends. The dog didn't leave her side, as if he knew she was the one who saved him. An officer with a kind smile told her, "Your mom and dad are on their way, okay?" Alara nodded, but her heart felt heavy again. She didn't want them to worry about her. When the door opened, her parents rushed in, their faces full of relief and worry. Alara, her mom, Isabel, cried as she knelt down in front of her daughter, taking her hands. "Are you okay? What happened?" "I'm sorry," Alara said, looking down. "I didn't mean to make you worry." Her dad, Gavin, crouched beside them. "Sweetheart, we were so scared when we couldn't find you," he said, his voice shaking. Alara hesitated, glancing at the dog beside her. "I had to help him," she said softly. "He was all alone." Isabel looked at the dog, who was pressed close to Alara, his eyes full of trust. She brushed her daughter's hair gently. "You're such a brave girl," she whispered, pulling Alara into a hug. But then an animal control officer stepped forward. "The dog needs to go to the shelter," he said firmly. "Strays can't just stay here." Alara's heart sank. She tightened her grip on the dog. "Please don't take him," she said, her voice breaking. "He's scared, and he doesn't have anyone. Please, Mama, Daddy, can we keep him?" Her parents exchanged a look. They knew how much the dog meant to her already. Isabel knelt down again. "Are you sure, sweetheart? Taking care of a dog is a big job." Alara nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I know, but he needs me, and I need him too." Gavin sighed, then turned to the officer. "We'll take him," he said quietly. Alara's face lit up with a smile, so bright it made all their worries fade for a moment. "Thank you, Mama." "Thank you, Daddy," she cried, hugging the dog tightly. She looked into the dog's big eyes and whispered, "I'll call you Lucky. You're safe now." From that day on, Lucky became part of their family. He stayed by Alara's side all the time, as if he knew how special she was. Every morning, Alara woke up to find Lucky curled up beside her bed, waiting for her to open her eyes. He was her best friend, her protector, and her joy. Alara would sit on the floor with Lucky, telling him stories about magical lands and secret adventures. "Today, we're going to explore the moon," she'd say, tracing little circles on his back. Lucky was always there, by Alara's side, listening to her every word with patience. His head would tilt to the side, as if he could hear and see the stars, the faraway world she would describe in her stories. It was as though he could picture each one, his dark eyes full of understanding as she spoke. Alara was different from other children. She had a gift for storytelling, creating whole worlds with her imagination. It was one of the things that made her unique, and it was something she shared with Lucky, her loyal dog. One evening, after dinner, Isabel and Gavin stood in the doorway of their home, watching Alara and Lucky. The soft light from the setting sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Alara was leaning against Lucky, her little body curling up against his warmth. She had her eyes closed, and as the evening quieted around them, it was clear that sleep was starting to take over. Lucky, however, never moved from his spot. He stayed close, always present, like a protector, his fur soft against Alara's skin. Isabel quietly turned to Gavin, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you ever think a dog could bring so much peace?" Her words were simple, but they carried so much meaning. Watching Alara and Lucky together, she could see the bond between them growing stronger every day. Gavin squeezed Isabel's hand gently, his eyes still focused on Alara and her dog. "No," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't. But look at her, Isabel. Look at what they have." He paused for a moment, taking in the scene before him. "She's found something none of us could give her. A friend who's just as gentle as she is. It's like Lucky knows exactly what she needs." And it was true. Lucky was unlike any other dog. He wasn't just a pet. He was her companion, her confidant. There was something special about the way he cared for Alara. It was almost as though he could sense her moods, her needs, without her saying a word. When Alara felt good, he would bounce around excitedly, nudging her with his nose, encouraging her to play. His tail would wag so hard that his whole body would wiggle along with it. He was always ready for adventure, just like Alara. But on the days when Alara felt tired, when her energy drained away, when her breaths became slower and her small hands grew too tired to sit up, Lucky would respond differently. He would lie beside her, his body close to hers, pressing against her, as if he could offer her comfort simply by being near. When she stroked his fur, Lucky would lean into her touch, his eyes full of love and understanding. His warmth seemed to seep into her, offering a quiet reassurance that nothing was wrong, that everything would be okay, even when Alara's body was slowing down. One afternoon, the light from the window filtered in, casting a soft glow across Alara's room. The sun was warm, and the air smelled fresh and clean, but inside, Alara was quiet, her mind somewhere far away, as usual. She was sitting on the floor next to Lucky, her back resting against the bed. Her hand rested gently on his back, and her fingers brushed through his soft fur. She had a lot of thoughts in her mind, things she didn't often say out loud. But Lucky, as always, was there to listen. "You know, Lucky," Alara whispered quietly, her voice full of softness. "I'm so glad I found you." She looked at him with wide eyes, filled with calm understanding, as though she could see beyond the here and now. "You make me feel strong, like I can face anything, even the parts that feel too big." Lucky's tail thumped softly against the floor, as if he understood every word she was saying. He leaned into her touch, pressing his body closer, offering her a sense of comfort that only a dog could give. His eyes met hers, and it was clear that there was a deep bond between them, one that no one else could understand. Lucky wasn't just her dog. He was her friend, her protector, her constant. He was always there when she needed him the most, just as she was always there for him. Gavin and Isabel could see the way Alara relied on Lucky. They saw how their bond grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just a typical relationship between a girl and her dog. It was something deeper. Lucky had become Alara's anchor, something to hold on to when the world around her seemed too much to bear. Even though Alara's health continued to slowly decline, even though her body became weaker, her spirit remained strong. She found strength in Lucky, and in turn, Lucky found his purpose in being there for her. Alara's health was never easy to watch. Each day brought its challenges. Each moment felt heavier than the last. But even in those difficult times, Alara never gave up. Her parents were both heartbroken and amazed by her strength, her courage in the face of something so hard. And as they watched her stroke Lucky's fur, her lips moving in soft whispers, they could feel both the weight of their sadness and the warmth of their gratitude. They were grateful for Lucky, who was there to give her something neither of them could: comfort, peace, and the feeling of being loved. One evening, as the days began to blur together, Alara lay in bed, her breathing soft and shallow. Her small body was curled up under the covers, and Lucky was right by her side, his head resting on the pillow next to hers. Gavin and Isabel sat on either side of her, their hands gently holding hers, their hearts heavy with love and sorrow. The air in the room felt still, as if the world outside had paused to give them a moment of peace. Alara's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and a faint smile tugged at her lips as she looked at each of them. She glanced at Lucky, his body pressed gently against hers, and whispered, "Thank you for letting him stay with me. He made everything feel easier." Isabel covered her mouth with her hand, unable to stop the tears that fell freely from her eyes. Gavin gently stroked Alara's hair, his own heart breaking as he tried to hold back his own tears. The room was quiet, save for the soft sound of Alara's breaths and the occasional sniffle from her parents. They stayed with her through the night, not wanting to leave her side, knowing that her time was coming to an end. Lucky never moved from his spot by Alara's side. He stayed right there, his body pressed against hers as if he could shield her from the sadness that hung in the air. He knew what was coming, just as they did. And then, as the first light of morning broke through the window, Alara's hand relaxed, her body still. Her breath stopped, and she slipped away quietly, peacefully, surrounded by the people who loved her most. Afterward, the house felt empty. The silence was overwhelming, and the quiet seemed to press down on Isabel and Gavin. They missed Alara's voice, her laughter, the way she would tell stories to Lucky. Every corner of the house seemed to hold memories of her, and it hurt to be in those spaces without her. Even Lucky felt the loss. He no longer followed them around the house. Instead, he stayed in her room, lying beside her bed, waiting for her to come back, though he knew she wouldn't. Then one morning, Gavin went into Alara's room to check on Lucky and found it empty. Panic rose in his chest as he searched the house, calling out for Isabel. "Lucky's gone," he said, his voice shaking with worry. Isabel rushed to him, her heart heavy with dread. "Maybe he went to her," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet ache. They hurried to the small cemetery where Alara had been laid to rest. As they approached her grave, they saw Lucky lying beside it, curled up against the gravestone, his head resting on the cold stone. Isabel gasped softly, her body shaking as the weight of the moment hit her. Gavin wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as they both looked at the small, loyal dog who had given Alara so much love, who had been her companion through it all. Lucky's eyes were closed, and his body was still, a quiet sign of loyalty and love that knew no end. It was a heartbreaking sight, but there was something peaceful about it too. They could see that Lucky had found his own way to be with Alara, even after she was gone. As the sunlight broke through the morning sky, it cast a soft glow over Lucky, and for a brief moment, the weight of grief seemed to lighten. It was as if the universe was telling them that Lucky, like Alara, had found his way to peace. In the days that followed, the house remained quiet, but somehow, Isabel and Gavin began to find a new rhythm. The grief didn't go away, but it slowly started to shift. They leaned on each other, and they found comfort in the memories of Alara, in the love that Lucky had given them all. Even though the house felt empty without her, there was a small sense of peace growing inside them, a peace that Alara had left behind in her letters, in the love she had shared, and in the bond they all had with Lucky. One evening, as they walked together under the stars, Isabel looked up and saw one star shining brighter than the others. She stopped and pointed at it, her voice quiet and full of wonder. "Do you think that's her?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the star. Gavin looked up at the night sky, a soft smile crossing his face. "I think it has to be," he replied. "Our little girl, keeping her promise." They stood there for a long time, holding each other close, feeling Alara's presence in the quiet night. The star seemed to shine a little brighter that night, like a beacon of love, reminding them that she would always be with them, just as she had promised. From that night on, whenever the sadness grew heavy, Isabel and Gavin would look up at the stars, and they knew that Alara was still there, watching over them. The bright star was her way of sending them love, just as Lucky had done during her life, reminding them that love never truly fades. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.